Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm Finlo Costain. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, has announced a potential watering down of nutrient neutrality requirements for new housing in England. Mr. Gove has said that legal requirements on house builders to offset nitrogen and phosphorus pollution will no longer be required. Instead, the burden of responsibility will shift to Natural England and to local authorities. Dr. Gabriel Connor-Streich is the Chief Executive of Greenshank Environmental. I asked him what we know about the Housing Secretary's proposals and what mechanisms could be used to change the law.
So we know there's going to be an amendment to the Levelling Up Bill, but as yet there's no information on what the wording to that amendment is. Based on the announcement this morning, it seems like there's been a pivot to a more strategic approach to tackling nutrient neutrality. Obviously, there's been announcements around quite a lot of additional funding going into various different approaches to managing nutrient pollution. And it seems that that pivot to a more strategic approach is going to be leaned on as the kind of way in which they can probably try and sort of somewhat remove quote unquote the need for nutrient neutrality. There was quite a few mentions of the sort of very small impact that housing has in the announcement, which suggests that they can also try and use that as justification for saying, with a wider package of strategic measures, that will ultimately tackle the nutrient pollution that comes from additional housing, and subsequently mean that the kind of current requirement for buying mitigation it can be kind of shifted onto these strategic approaches.
You talk about a strategic shift. My understanding is that there's a shifting of that burden of responsibility from the house builders themselves to Natural England and to local authorities.
Yeah, it sounds like they're kind of saying that they want there to be some kind of plans in place that basically tackles the wider problem, I suppose, and that can be relied on by house builders in terms of discharging their requirements. I mean, again, how this is all going to fit together is going to come out in the wording of the amendment. So that kind of broad idea is the other approach, I suppose, to dealing with this issue, which hasn't currently been pursued by the government, but seemingly they've shifted towards doing it now. I think it's interesting. It's a recognition, that the nutrient neutrality is baked into UK law via the house regs. And they can't just kind of get rid of it, as they have slightly been suggesting they were going to try and do. So there's a need to, give, as I said, they're going to give greater freedom to Natural England to address this issue. So I guess giving more latitude somehow to Natural England planning authorities to develop some form of response that will enable them, I suppose, to discharge the requirements. But exactly what that is, obviously, is still unknown.
Up until now, it's very much been a market-based approach. And as you say, the burden of responsibility is shifting. And these changes, of course, that we're discussing will affect England only. But I wonder if you can talk us through the risks associated with the Housing Secretary's new approach.
For one time, obviously, one of the biggest issues that the house builders have been saying about this is that they have been waiting to build for anything up to sort of 4 years in some of the affected areas. This kind of a pivot away from the current market-based approach is obviously going to require people to, the people in the sector to do things slightly differently. And so how long it will take to sort of form these strategies, if that is the direction it's going, is an open question. But it can take quite a long time. And at what point are you going to have the certainty behind a strategy that facilitates it being used to support, habitat calculation assessment for a new housing development? So, is it something where it seems very well meaning, but then suddenly you're going, oh, well, it's going to take us another year before we've even got the outline of a strategy that's actually going to be able to allow developers to get planning permissions off the back of it? So I think that's one potential problem. I think the delivery at the moment, again, it's all kind of geared around, the market and mitigation providers basically being people that are financially incentivized to give over their land into these kind of schemes. It's a big shift to suddenly put it onto, various different public sector bodies. They did talk about private investment was mentioned in the announcement, although how that fits in with a kind of something that seems to be taking away the market mechanism, I don't really know. So it does seem like there's going to be a bit of we're going to have to figure out how this stuff is going to be delivered, when ultimately what you really need to get hold of to deliver these schemes is land. and getting hold of land is not that easy.
Now, we've talked a bit about the proposed changes, but I wonder if you could talk us through how nutrient neutrality is currently being delivered in England and how consistent that approach is, how patchy it is in some areas.
As mentioned a few times so far, the current approach has been kind of actually promoted by government as well. I mean, back in the summer of last year, they actively said they wanted a kind of market-driven approach to this problem. And so at the moment, there are mitigation scheme providers who are bringing these schemes to market and basically selling sort of mitigation in the form of a kind of nutrient credit. And developers calculate their requirements, which is quite a specific number. You know, they need a certain number of kilos of either nitrogen or phosphorus that they need to basically find mitigation for, and then they purchase offsets from mitigation scheme providers. And a lot of these schemes are being delivered by private companies, but there's also some that are being delivered by local planning authorities. So one of the best examples of that is the wetland scheme in Herefordshire. And then some other local planning authorities have kind of been working for quite a long time on schemes that haven't necessarily brought anything forward yet. And then Natural England have this wider national nutrient mitigation scheme. They've brought some credits forward in the River Tees catchment, and they're looking to do that in other catchments around the country. So it's not consistent across the whole country in terms of who's doing what, but the kind of overarching principle is there are people bringing schemes forward and they are selling nutrient credits at a price that's kind of either dictated by restrictions on them, I think, or just the market.
Now, when we're talking about nutrient neutrality, we're essentially talking about nitrogen and phosphorus offsetting. Can you tell us how those different markets work, how those different elements are offset?
At the moment, a lot of the approaches being taken are using nature-based solutions. So, you know, one of the most kind of widely used approaches is taking agricultural land out of production, putting it into some kind of natural, sort of more natural land use. And just by ceasing nutrient inputs associated with those agricultural land uses, you generate mitigation. Wetlands are the other big one that people are looking to a lot. Basically, wetlands promote natural processes that take nutrients out of the environment. And at Greenshank, we're working on slightly more, I suppose, innovative quote unquote solutions for managing kind of runoff within agricultural environments. It doesn't take up lots of land, but promotes the same kind of processes that you get within wetland systems. This kind of stuff that's been mainly used in America but hasn't been used much over here.
Now, how do you think that this change will affect the natural capital market? Clearly, the market is still emerging and some things are easier to offset than others.
I think, nutrients are a nascent natural capital market, and really with apart from carbon credits, it's kind of the only currently functioning natural capital market in the country. And so there was a lot of learning, I think, that was going on in terms of how, particularly these kind of compliance-driven markets might operate. If this kind of market mechanism that sits behind nutrient neutrality is taken away, then I think there's just going to be a missed opportunity, really, in terms of learning how, one of these how natural capital markets can function. So I don't think there is going to be other natural capital markets. It's going to develop in other ways, but it does seem like a bit of a shame that what's happened over the past few years is probably going to seemingly just kind of fall into the background, and we will potentially lose kind of an opportunity to take forward what's being developed through, or really kind of seeing how this market can develop into a fully functioning market that will, a lot of other markets potentially learn from.
Now, clearly, there's been a lot of lobbying by the big house building companies over the last couple of years. Do you think the government has essentially caved in to the housing lobby? And what does this say about the government's commitment to natural capital markets and the general funding of natural capital recovery in England?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like this is definitely come off the back of pretty intense lobbying by the House Builders Federation, particularly in the House Builders lobby. So yes, I think they're kind of now looking at it and going, it's politically more important for us to deal with the housing issue rather than looking at the potential benefits that can come from natural capital markets. And it's just very mixed messaging. I think that's one of the key things that they published the Nature Markets Framework earlier this year. That set out a very clear direction for the government in terms of where they're looking to kind of use nature markets to bring private finance into supporting the kind of work that is being done to develop nutrient offsetting or other things. And they cited nutrient neutrality as a key market that is currently active and that should be learnt from. So the fact they've done this kind of it also just, it seems like a bit of a, I think a lot of people were looking at this and going, why didn't you do this to begin with? It's just completely mixed policy. You know, last summer they're saying we want a market-based approach to this. This summer they've, you know, as the market, you know, bearing in mind the market has had to spin up from nothing in the space of sort of 4 years, and up until March last year, it sort of wasn't, I suppose, like, you know, that bigger a market, so there haven't been as many people looking at it. When it expanded last year, it became much larger, so much more focus has gone into you know, how we can bring solutions forward, and it just feels like they haven't really looked at that big picture, and they could have gone, okay, we're going to basically look to streamline how the market functions, because that's kind of what all the work's been done on so far. And now suddenly they've just gone, oh, okay, no, we don't want to address how to make this work, even though, you know, given that it's kind of pretty much functioning now, we're just going to do something completely different. I think going back to the time issue, how long is it actually going to take for this to fall out into a set of solutions that actually works for the development sector, I think is a really big question. So yeah, just this government has been pretty good at giving very unclear direction in terms of where policy is going. It's happened again, and it's inevitably going to have a bit of an issue. You know, it's going to slightly hamper natural capital markets more widely, I think, and probably put them a bit more on the back foot, and probably undermine confidence to an extent as well.
That was Dr. Gabriel Connor-Streich from Greenshank Environmental. More about this and our other headline news on our website, 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back later this week. Thanks for watching.